Okay, I'm about to get way too into this, but you can totally watch and understand Avengers Infinity War if you've only seen the other Avengers movies. You don't have to watch the rest of the MCU to understand Avengers Infinity War. Let me explain. So, yeah, just a few weeks ago, I was watching Avengers Infinity War, and then I thought to myself, how can I get some, watch some of the other MCU movies to better appreciate Avengers Infinity War without having to watch the entire MCU. And so then I just decided to watch the Avengers movies themselves because this is for a couple of reasons. Because, well, one, when you read a Marvel comic book, like the Avengers Marvel comic book, you don't have to go reading the individual solo comics in order to understand what's happening in that Avengers comic. You could just read the Avengers comic and understand the Avengers comic, and hopefully, if there are any tie-ins to the solo titles, then you can just then they'll tell you, and then you can go see it. The other reason is because in other movie trilogies and in other movie series that are like serialized or continue the story, which is say like not episodic sequels, they make references to stuff that happens outside of the movies all of the time. Stuff that happened in between the movies, like the Star Wars movies. The Star Wars movies, yeah, now they're all the gaps are all filled in. But when the Star Wars movies came out, they were just the Star Wars movies, and those Star Wars movies, they make references to stuff, you know, that happened before those movies, and they don't apologize for it. They just go on with the story. They don't bother to explain to you everything. So in that light, I just decided, well, I'm just gonna watch Avengers Infinity War, and I'm gonna pretend the rest of the MCU doesn't exist, and I'm just going to appreciate the Avengers movie trilogy. And as of right now, it is a trilogy. Avengers 4 hasn't come out yet. I'm just going to appreciate the movie trilogy for what it is. Just pretend none of the other MCU movies exist. And it was really, really good. It was so much fun. I mean, really, it's the essential team. It's a quintessential team up movie franchise. It's really great. So So yeah, one of the things. So some of the things I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the themes of the Avengers franchise. I'm going to talk about how the movie explains the fills in the gaps, both sets up in the final act, and then also fills in the first act, and mostly in the first act, and then explain how some of these events um, either slightly differ or you gain different understandings. So maybe there's going to be like maybe a little bit of like fan narrative in there, but really I'm going to try to stick to the actual events of the film. So yeah, very briefly, what are the Avengers movies about? Well, the Avengers movies are about this team of enhanced individuals come together, save the world when all else fails. The first Avengers movie is actually very much about the concept of the team up. Will will the team up work? That's both the uh, the theme of the movie and also the meta narrative of the movie. The movie is constantly asking itself, will this team up movie work? And I think that one of the brilliant decisions that this movie makes is that it decides not to ignore the previous movies, rather to give you just enough information that you can fill in the gaps yourself. Just it tells you everything you need to know about the characters, about the story in the movie itself, which I think gets carried over to Age of Ultron and Infinity War, which is why it's it winds up working out this way. So yeah, the very first movie, it sets up for you all of the characters. It tells you everything you need to know about their backstories. It tells you that something happened in New Mexico which caused an escalation in threat analysis, and for an escalation in like uh, in defense against for alien threats. Um, it shows you that Captain America had something to do with the Tesseract, and he was found in ice and woken up. And so the Tesseract came from like his story. And you got this guy named Iron Man, and he's got his thing going. And all of them have their own things going on, and they all come together to stop all of this, to stop the invasion of New York from happening. And and then at the end of the movie, everyone goes their separate ways. But within the first movie drops the hints of what's going to happen in the second movie, namely two things. The first thing being that Shield was doing research on the Tesseract, and part of that research included figuring out what World War II Hydra was doing with the Tesseract, which meant that they were researching the Hydra weapons, and they were also looking to make those modernize those weapons and update them, and also that the World Security Council was more than happy to just like blow up New York City in order to stop the alien invasion, just to destroy a city and kill millions of people to save the world. So it sets up that part, and then the second movie comes along, and in the first act, and also in the theme of the movie being, well, now that the Avengers are together, are they any better at saving the world than the powers that were existed before? And and the reason for that is because it fills you in the first act of the movie that that there was that corruption, that research into Hydra weapon, there was more. Sorry, the first act will tell you that there was more to the Hydra weapons in the helicarrier than meets the eye. That there was actually Hydra within Shield, and that Captain America had a hand in tearing both of them down. And in that confusion, a bunch of Shield stuff got taken, including the scepter, and so they are tying up loose ends by hunting for these items for Hydra. And so it tells you that something happened there. And then also, um, Thor mentions. I mean, well, and the fun thing that the first movie does is that it keeps on asking. Um, oh, so I do need to go back to the first movie because I need to mention two things. One, the first movie, Thor keeps on asking Loki, "Who put you up to this?" Right, and you need to remember that the first Avengers movie is framed by these first and last scenes of the mouth of Thanos, if you will, and he's um, and so he starts off talking in the movie, and then he ends in the stinger with Thanos at the end, the Thanos reveal, which shows you very clearly like this movie, the movie trilogy is story wise going to be about the Infinity Stones and eventually Thanos, and then thematically it's about the concept of team ups, right? It's all good. So then, so there, that's what I wanted to say about the first movie. So now the second movie, it sets all this up. So then thematically, the movie's asking, like I said, the movie's asking, what are the Avengers any better than the powers that were before? And so the movie gives them an Infinity Stone and tasks them with saving the world. And then it turns out that they don't do much better. Tony starts experimenting on it, winds up creating a weapon that gets out of hand, and then they have to put it down. And in the process, a bunch of people die. So yeah, it's a tragic. In a sense, it's a Avengers: Age of Ultron is a tragic movie because of that. Um, because of the way that works out, it shows that the heroes aren't any better than the powers. However, it also demonstrates that if the team that as long as the team sticks together, they will persevere. As long as they stick together as a team and work as a team, they will persevere. And it confirms that, at the very least in the movie, despite the arguments that the team have occasionally over their ideological differences over what it means to save the world. Especially that one conversation, Tony and Steve, they're like, we can bust arms dealers every day of the week, but that up there is the end game. How are we going to beat that? Steve says together. Tony says we'll lose. Tony says, I mean, that's Tony. And Steve says, we'll do that together too. So that sets it set is a it's a very good foreshadowing into what will happen in the third movie. The third movie then asks you what will um, what happens if the Avengers are not together and the end game happens. And well, as we find out in Infinity War, that the answer to that is if they're not together and the end game happens, then happens. Right? That's not good. Um, yeah. So yeah, there are ties between the first and second movie um, that explain what happens in between. So you don't really need to know anything. You don't. You actually don't need to know anything. It's all in the movie. Just pay attention to Avengers: Age of Ultron. The blanks get filled in from what happens in between the first and the second movie. Then the third movie, between the second and the third movie, my goodness. Okay, so the end of the second, so at the end of the second movie, right? It shows you Steve is in charge of the Avengers. He's gonna whip him into shape. Tony is kind of like on a semi-retirement thing that he's just kind of be around. Black Widow at his side, Hawkeye retired. Um, Thor is gonna go search for the Infinity Stones, and Hulk is gone. Ooh, what else was this one? No, this one. Oh, next one. So yeah, it sets up for you um, everything that you need to know about it gives you good establishing endpoints for everybody. And then the third movie picks up, and what happens? That very first scene drops you off right in the middle of it does so much heavy lifting. I mean, really, my goodness, if you watch it like this, and that jump between two and three, it feels like it's been so many years since the second movie. Like lots has happened because you show up and Thor was gonna go search for the Infinity Stones. Now, not only has he found the Infinity Stone, it's in a glove. Thanos is wearing it, and Asgard is gone. He's missing an eye. Loki's there, and the movie does very good to bringing back Loki in that very first scene to just right away tell you, but boom, Thanos is way more serious than Loki. So, so yeah, there's a lot of exposition going on there. You're not exactly sure what happens, but you know that somehow Thor and Bruce wound up together in space. A lot of stuff happened. Thor's completely different, but none of that really matters because then it all gets destroyed, right? So, and then, while the events of Civil War, I mean, the movie honestly, earnestly treats the events of Civil War like a mystery. Um, I guess to because the POV character in Infinity War is Bruce. So Bruce is always asking a bunch of questions. That's why he just always seems lost. And I guess he's useful in that way to provide exposition to the audience uh, who only watch the Avengers franchise without watching the rest of the MCU. And it's like, what happened? Oh, we broke up. And he's like, what, like the Beatles? The Avengers don't just break up. Well, it happened. And it isn't until later when Steve and the gang show up at Avengers headquarters that they're like, oh yeah, the Sokovia Accords happened because of the stuff that you all have done, and and yeah, so you do find out about it, you do learn about it. Then what are some of the other stuff that fills in there? Oh, Wakanda, how you go from this very interesting thing about Wakanda because a couple of things. Because you only get a small hint about Wakanda in Age of Ultron. You know that the vibranium comes from there, and then you find out that Captain America and Black Panther are friends, and he's welcome, and that Steve Rogers and his crew are welcome in Wakanda, and you're like, huh? And then you're like, hey, Steve Rogers doesn't have his shield, so then, and I know that this was a comics storyline, like the whole idea that like Steve Rogers recognizing that the vibranium that was used to make his shield was stolen Wakandan vibranium, and so he went to return it to Black Panther, but Black Panther is like, you are an honest and lawful good man, so you can keep it. So the idea that like he's there with the friend. Yeah. So yeah, Winter Soldier. The build up to the the big reveal to the Winter Soldier is not is kind of weird, but also it was at least set up a little bit in the second movie about like our missing persons case. Well, like you could kind of assume, well, that missing persons was in Wakanda maybe. So this is like a little bit of fan casting that goes out there. Oh my goodness, let me take a moment, step back to Avengers Age of Ultron and just say that knowing nothing about Rhodey and then seeing him in Avengers Age of Ultron, because the first time that you see him is at the party and he's telling the War Machine story. It's hilarious. It's hilarious. It's like, because there's people out there and they're doing all of these things, and it shows you that there's this greater world out there of stuff happening and other heroes doing things. There's a War Machine story, which is funny because in the MCU there isn't a War Machine movie, but according to the Avengers Age of Ultron, there are War Machine stories. That's amazing. And then Falcon, you know nothing about Sam Wilson up until or his power set or anything until you see him. It's like, oh, he's got wings and shit. Okay, that's cool, I guess, because that's what we're doing now. We're into wings, um, and so yeah, those setups are really cool. Um, do, 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 do. Oh, you kind of see. Gee, okay, so I got totally into the fan casting. I kind of got lost. Oh, let me talk about some of the other characters that get introduced besides Black Panther. So Doctor Strange, like we are like it, without any other MCU context, Doctor Strange is a wizard that belongs to a secretive society who's tasked with um, keeping safe the Time Stone. Right? You don't need to know anything about the Sanctum Sanctorum and how they protect Earth from other dimensions. You don't need to know any of that stuff. They protect the where did it go? There we go. They protect the time stone, and that's that. You don't need to know anything else. Spider-Man, just somebody that Tony knew. It's made obvious that Tony and Spider-Man have worked together just by their friendly banter at the beginning when they meet each other. Also, the fact that he had a secret Iron Spider suit hanging out in the Avengers headquarters. The fact that Tony has that it comes out of the Avengers headquarters tells you that Tony at least is the actual Avenger, which tells you that then everyone else who's not there are off being elsewhere. So I guess clues you in on that. Who else? The Guardians. Okay, the Guardians is the weirdest one. The Guardians is the weirdest one because the Guardians are kind of like alternate Avengers in this movie. They're show they because they have the banter, they kind of have the family aspect down of them, and um, and Drax and just the way that they talk and the way that they act, being all like how Quill is all arrogant, and then and Drax hates plans, and Tony must have seen himself in that moment because that scene where um, they're trying to come up with a plan and the Guardians of the Galaxy aren't don't want to listen to the plan or have a plan, or they don't even know words and they're all dumb. There's there's kind of a tradition. Just I'm gonna say there's kind of a tradition in that in anime, from my understanding. I'm not big into anime, but people that I've talked to that are into anime tell me that there's this kind of a tradition sometimes where like you just put like even in a realistic anime that there's just like anthropomorphic animals in there and just other stuff like that because that's a thing that happens to like kind of switch up the mood or break the genre, um, just do something weird, quirky, just world building stuff. So like Mantis and Rocket and Groot definitely play into that silliness. Um, they're like jokey Avengers. It's kind of hard because the thing about the Guardians is that unfortunately the movie doesn't make super explicit that the Guardians of the Galaxy were the ones that dealt with the Power Stone before. There was only like that inkling of knowledge that it happened, but it wasn't completely there. And yeah, and Thanos is well set up. Black Order, they don't matter. They're henchmen. Um, but yeah, and then the story with Gamora is well set up. Um, the thing about the Russos is that the Russos they came from television and did Arrested Development and Community, and so they know how to tell stories in just a few scenes because like in a comedy in a sitcom you have 22 minutes to tell a story, so like you got to make every scene count. So they do a very good job of that with Gamora's story, showing like the significance of the double-sided um, knife thing and kind of showing that relationship between them. So like you don't need to have seen the other movies, although I mean it helps. Like I've said before, like yeah, it definitely helps, and you gain a slightly skewed understanding from like the actual MCU, but you understand what they're all about. You as in conclusion, because I realize now I've run 22 minutes into this video. So in conclusion, give it a shot. Um, or just introduce them to a friend that way. Like if you're gonna take, you don't have to confuse your friends and be like, what is it at this point? 20 movies so far. Ant Man and the Wasp was the last one. Yeah, you don't need to confuse your friends and be like, you need to watch all of these movies and give them like your box sets. No, just be like, you want to go watch Infinity War with me? You want to find out about the thing that I've been talking about for weeks. Like there's only two other movies you need to watch before that, and when they're like, but what happened here and what is this about, what's this reference to, be like, well, you know what, there's other movies do that. Like I guess like nowadays, especially kind of with the current crop of Star Wars movies where like the um the non the non-episode Star Wars movies, Rogue One and Solo, are there kind of just filling in the gaps of like stuff that happened before, and also the entire prequel trilogy is adding context to the original trilogy, and then also like fan confusion with Snoke, because like Snoke doesn't get any backstory, and you just remember there was a time where the only thing that a lot of people knew about Star Wars, and I mean I guess that's still true to this day, is that the only thing people have to know about Star Wars were the three Star Wars movies, episodes 4, 5, and 6. So if people can understand that, they should definitely be okay with just watching the Avengers movies on their own. Um, yeah, I think I explained it very well. I said I was going to talk about how you can watch the Avengers movies uh, without watching any of the MCU, and I explained the themes of the Avengers movies. I explained how the narratives tie in certain points, explaining um, how certain exposition in the movies fills in the gaps in between movies, and I also even provided a couple of like fun alternate explanations in there that you could glean kind of from like the understandings that are gained that are different from if you had seen the entire MCU. So I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. Um, I know that I do every time that I get to talk about Marvel movies. So sticker. So yeah, have fun. Go watch it. Enjoy. Um, yeah, yeah. Go enjoy the Avengers movies now. Go enjoy the trilogy, and then talk to me about it. I love talking about this stuff. So really, go ahead.